Nitro Rad.
There's a handful of RPG Maker horror games that have broken the bounds of obscurity thanks to YouTubers that are known for playing horror games. However, in the eyes of those kinds of people, they're viewed as just horror indie games rather than something that's part of the pixel horror following. A handful of these games include Ao no Oni, Mad Father, The Witch's House, and possibly one of the more well-known ones, The Crooked Man. You ever heard of Akinator the Genie? It's a game of 20 questions or rather on the internet that'll guess whatever character you're thinking of after a series of yes or no questions. It's grown pretty accurate over the years since it learns from the input of thousands of users who play the game regularly. One time I was trying to get him to guess Kyukyukin from Yume Nikki, as that's a much more obscure character and I'd be a little more impressed if it was able to get that. After answering that final question, he says, "Was this your character?" as I'm greeted by a rather disturbing image. It was The Crooked Man. That's how I first heard of this game. The creepy image actually caught me quite off guard when I first saw it. After I heard this game was an RPG Maker game, it immediately drew my interest. The Crooked Man was made in Wolf RPG Editor, a lot like Mad Father was. For the longest time I actually thought this was an American-made title, as a lot of the characters have American names, takes place in America, and it draws inspiration from the English poem, There Was a Crooked Man. However, it turns out I was actually wrong this whole time. It was made by a Japanese user named Uri, who's also known for making Mermaid Swamp, Paranoiac, and a handful of other titles. It's really not hard to figure out that the American style is very influenced by the Silent Hill franchise. That becomes evident very quickly. I say if you're going to draw inspiration from Silent Hill, your game better be good, because I think y'all know how much I love me some Silent Hill, so let's take a look. The title screen is much more minimal than most, featuring a high contrast black and white image of the Crooked Man and a complete lack of music. I'm sure it was some sort of artistic decision not to include music here, but personally, I think it just makes the title screen a little bit bland. When you start up the game, you get that classic warning about how the game has grotesque images and... wait a minute. Sudden surprises? Hang on, what sudden surprises? What is that supposed to mean? Please don't tell me this game is jump scares. It is jump scares. After the warning, we're greeted with a classic nursery rhyme entitled, There Was a Crooked Man. It reads, "There was a crooked man who walked a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence upon a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat, which caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a crooked little house." This rhyme dates all the way back to the 1840s and was written by James Halliwell, who was actually a British citizen making this poem from English origin. Afterwards, we're quickly introduced to our main character, David Hoover, who's moving into a new apartment with the help of his newly married best friend, Paul. Paul and his wife, Marion, soon go home, leaving David all alone in his spooky little apartment. David's got that generic brown hair, t-shirt, and jacket feel going for him. I can feel the Silent Hill inspiration already. Game control is exactly like any other RPG Maker game, so I won't bother explaining it. Except saving is done through the pause menu rather than having save points, and I hate this, and I'll explain why later. As time passes, a number of bizarre things will happen in David's apartment. Things like hearing crying, finding mysterious messages, furniture moving itself. But for some reason, David just likes to shrug it all off. Yeah, it's probably nothing. David also pays his mother a visit in the hospital. She's suffering from an Alzheimer's of sorts and fails to even recognize him. It's kind of a heartbreaking scene watching as David is forced to leave his only remaining family as she screams for help, thinking that he's some sort of intruder rather than her own son. David continues to experience paranormal ongoings. After deciding that there must be some reason these strange things are happening, David discovers that the notes have been left behind by the former tenant of his apartment. Hoping to discover the reason behind these hauntings, he embarks out to meet the guy, with his only lead being the address of an old hotel. This concludes the prologue. Much like Mogeko Castle, The Crooked Man is divided into multiple chapters, each of which takes place at a different location. The first a hotel, the second a school, and the third a hospital. Oh gee wow, where have that sound familiar from before? This is where the real meat of the game is. You'll explore the hotel searching for key items you'll use to solve puzzles and progress. Honestly, it's pretty much just an RPG Maker version of Silent Hill. And it's not half bad either. Just like Silent Hill, you'll find that 90% of the doors don't work. I never really understood this. Why make the hallways this long if they're just going to be full of doors you can't enter? I suppose it's because they wanted to make the game feel like you're in a full-sized hotel, but also wanted to keep the game condensed enough not to be too confusing. It's still a tad irritating, though, to try every single door just to find out most of them don't work. The game's atmosphere is really good. The hotel is dark and barren with a total absence of any kind of music. Instead, we're treated to the droning sound of the wind outdoors, and it complements the game's mood exceptionally. This wonderful atmosphere is completely and utterly ruined by the inclusion of jump scares. That's right, occasionally, a spooky image will suddenly fill the screen with a loud sound. Just when I was starting to like the game's atmosphere and level and style of horror, it suddenly, out of nowhere, stoops to using pop scares. These things are cheap, and they're not even real horror, and I'll tell you why. Fear is an ongoing thing, something that stays present within you. If something's scary, you should continue to feel scared after leaving the game. Jump scares don't scare people. They startle people. You get a sudden jolt of anxiety, but after 2 seconds, it's all gone. The fear leaves completely, and that is not good horror. Jump scares are also incredibly easy to do. Anyone can do them. Right now, as I edit this video, I could just easily cut to a picture of something creepy and play a sound that's way louder than the audio track you're hearing right now. Look, I literally just did it in that short amount of time. It's cheap, and it requires 0 effort. Jump scares are bullshit. Regardless, the atmosphere is really nice, and the jump scares don't ruin the game. It's just that I wish Uri found better ways of scaring the player. Like .flow and Yume Nikki with the use of surrealism to creep out the player. That's good. Anyway, it's here in the hotel that you'll first encounter the Crooked Man. You'll run into this thing a number of times, sometimes even having to trap it. There's a number of scenes where you'll have to think very quickly in order to defeat it. These range from being really, really cool to being really frustrating. Here's an example of a cool one. You encounter him in a room you've already gone to before, a bar. Since you're already familiar with this area, it's likely that you've interacted with a bottle on this table, which David says, "Drinking this would burn me alive." You now know this bottle is important because interacting with it triggered a dialogue that's very different than the dialogue triggered by anything else in the room. Alright, so now when the Crooked Man comes into the room and you have less than 6 seconds before he kills you, you know to use this bottle. But wait, that wasn't enough. Oh shit, what do I have on me? A lighter? Bingo. Light the bastard on fire. That is a really cool puzzle. But unfortunately, they're not all like that. You have so little time to figure out just what to do before the Crooked Man runs into you, giving you a game over. And if that wasn't bad enough, game overs make you go back to the title screen, so you have to load your last save. So if you haven't saved recently, you're gonna have to do everything all over. This is why I hate the saving system. In Mad Father, there was save points. This constantly reminded you to save, and you would do it every time you saw one. It was instant, required hardly any time at all. You would just do it. This way, if something screwed you over, you'd be safe. You just go back to the save point right in the room before. The Crooked Man, on the other hand, requires you to pause the game and save manually. This means no reminder to do it, and there's nothing telling you when you need to do it. Back to Mad Father. If you could die in the next room, there'd be a save point right there in the room before. In the Crooked Man, there's nothing telling you you can get killed in the next room, so you don't know to save. This makes the game very frustrating because the chances are you will fail the first time on multiple encounters with the Crooked Man. To make matters even worse, the save feature becomes disabled when you're in a room with the Crooked Man. So, when it's already too late, oops, can't save anymore. I highly recommend if you play this game, save often. At the end of the chapter, you'll encounter a boss fight with the Crooked Man. And god damn, these are some of the most frustrating boss battles I've ever played in my life. It essentially involves you just trying to swing your weapon at the Crooked Man without letting him get too close to you. This is incredibly difficult because he's always walking towards you, and he gets a burst of speed every couple of seconds. Yeah, they do get a little bit easier once you get the gun, but for real, this game did not need boss battles. At least the game has the decency to make you save before the boss battles, but that just makes me question, why doesn't it make you save before every encounter with the Crooked Man instead of just the boss battles? The puzzles in the Crooked Man are really hit and miss. Some of them are pretty cool and fun to solve, like this one right here that requires you to interpret this vague drawing as directions of what objects to interact with in certain rooms. Puzzles like this are easily on par with the puzzles you'd find in Silent Hill, which is actually extremely impressive for a freeware game. The bad ones, on the other hand, range from frustratingly confusing to downright bullshit. One of the puzzles requires you to know binary. Binary. How the goddamn hell was I supposed to know binary? Let alone know that I needed to know binary. Nothing here tells you that it's in binary. It's just a wire sculpture in the shape of numbers. This is made much worse because you're trying to interpret this as numbers. Different numbers used as a code. So knowing to interpret numbers as binary instead of just the numbers you need as the code is just something that's not going to be grasped by the majority of players. Before I lose my mind talking about the game's puzzles, why don't we look at the game's final saving grace? The story. As David goes to each area, he never finds anything that helps him understand who and what the Crooked Man really is, or why his apartment was being haunted. Instead, each time he runs into a new character. The first is Sissy, a girl searching the hotel for an important item she left there long ago. It's a memento left to her by her ex-boyfriend, someone she just can't get over no matter how hard she tries. David's able to relate to her as he's also constantly troubled by the end of his relationship just months prior. Nothing helpful turns up other than another address, which David then drives to. It's a lawyer's school where David meets with another character named Dee, a failed law student who's determined to become a lawyer, despite failing the course many times. Again, David is really able to relate to this character as he's had a similar plight regarding his post-secondary education. After exploring the school to no avail, David finds yet another address to go to, this time a hospital where he meets with a young boy who's worried about his mother, who has abandoned him. Yet again, David's able to relate to the character, as, like I mentioned before, David has had many problems with his mother who is currently hospitalized. The story the characters share are interesting, enticing, but most of all, heartbreaking. The more we learn about these characters, the more we learn about David. David's past is slowly shown to us, and with each and every story, he becomes a stronger character. Helping these characters with their problem helps David understand himself. The more he recognizes the flaws in others, the more he understands the flaws in himself. The game's writing is actually kind of powerful and hits every nail on the head. It's also paced exceptionally well as each chapter gradually unfolds a chunk of David's character. By the end of the game, we discover what the Crooked Man really is, and it ends up being a very Silent Hill-esque entity. The inspiration the game's story draws from Silent Hill is easily done justice with the fantastic way the narrative was handled. I honestly was not expecting a story this good. I'm gonna have to be real with you for a second. The Crooked Man story is damn good. Every long scene full of dialogue, I found myself staring at my computer screen completely engaged, unable to tear my eyes off of the words being presented to me. A good level of theming is also present in the game, tackling topics ranging from self-esteem to mental illness. This just isn't fair. Why does a game with this many gameplay issues get a story this amazing? I honestly think The Crooked Man would have been much better off as a visual novel instead of a RPG Maker horror game. I was reading Uri's blog and she said that she wanted to make a game that had more action this time around. But trust me, you really didn't need to include action. If you didn't have those action segments, this could have been a great game. I just don't know what to make of it. I just don't know what to make of The Crooked Man. It is hands down one of the best narratives I've ever experienced in an RPG Maker game, as far as free ones go anyway, and it's pretty much well worth playing just for that. It's just so hard to recommend because the game suffers from so many problems. Frustrating boss battles, hit and miss puzzles, and a handful of saving issues. I guess it just really boils down to whether or not the game's story is worth putting up with the shortcomings. And the answer to that question is... yeah, it is. The story is just too good to pass up. I just highly recommend you play this game with a walkthrough and a lot of patience. Link to the game is down below. If you decide to try it out, I just hope you'll have a less frustrating time than I did. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, and welcome to the end. If you really enjoyed this video, I'd highly appreciate it if you could click that like button. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more Nitro Rad in the future. I also have a Facebook page you can like where you can see exclusive Nitro Rad updates and lots of pictures of me making stupid faces. If you're in the mood for another video on an RPG Maker game, I've got two more I did previously right here. One on a game called Mad Father, and another on a game called Mogeko Castle. Thanks for watching, have yourselves a good night, and as always, take care guys. The Crooked Man is made in Wolf RPG Editor, a lot like Mad Father was. This game was made by a Japanese user named Bob. Bob made the game.